Welcome to the Principles of Performance podcast, where we discuss how to optimize your health, fitness, and performance. Drawing on decades of experience of working as coaches, consultants, and trainers to top performers, athletes, and teams from professional sports to top universities to the U.S. military, Eric DeGatti and Mike Perry discuss topics and strategies of how to perform at your highest level and be your very best. Join us and our friends and colleagues who are leaders in the fitness and performance industry as we investigate and challenge the most popular training, nutrition, lifestyle, and recovery protocols. Okay, here we go. Episode 7 of the Principles of Performance podcast. My name is Eric DeGatti, as one of your hosts, along with my partner, Michael Perry. And we are honored to have a very special guest with us today. If you've been in our industry for any time, I'm sure you know this guy's name, Dr. Charlie Weingroff, one of the most sought after professionals in physical therapy and athletic performance. He's the triple threat. He's a doctor of physical therapy, certified athletic trainer, and a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Works with a lot of big names that I'm sure you'll know. He's now based in sunny Florida. You can see the palm trees in the back if you're watching this on YouTube. He's kind of rubbing it in a little bit on us, and you can see him down in the Boca, Fort Lauderdale area down there. But I know he's a Jersey boy at heart, and he will make some trips back up here if he has offices in Manhattan every once in a while. A little bit of history on Charlie. He was the physical performance lead and head strength and conditioning coach for Canadian men's basketball. As well as Nike Executive Performance Council, lead PT for the United States Marine Special Operations Command, head strength and conditioning coach for the Philadelphia 76ers in the NBA, director of athletic development for the Roddick Grunberg Tennis Academy. He's consulted for teams in all Northern American sports, as well as Man U, Manchester City in the English Premier League. And then a lot of us know him through his work and his accomplishments through his program, Training Equals Rehab. And that's going to be a lot of what we talk about today. And so thank you for joining us, Dr. Charlie Weingroff.
You got it, guys. Thank you very much for having me. It's always flattering to hear other people talk about my stuff, because I don't like doing that very often.
Well, going back, I was trying to figure it out. I think, Charlie, you and I crossed paths at one of the first SFMA courses going way back at the original Athletes Performance out at Arizona State University. And, going back then, much earlier in our careers, me being on the fitness side of things, and you kind of having your hand in all three realms of athletic training, fitness, and physical therapy, back then it wasn't so much a given that we all worked together and played nice in the sandbox, right? And so this concept that you kind of brought forward of training equals rehab, I always kind of gravitated towards, but it wasn't kind of cool back then, was it? So tell me a little bit about how the acceptance of that concept has changed over the years since you brought it about.
Yeah, well, for one, I was not the first to use that terminology. I found out somewhat challenging, but once I made it to the list of who did originate it, that put me in rarefied air to be harassed on social media by this individual. So I didn't make it up, and I certainly didn't make up the concept. So now I wonder though sometimes when there's a similar question, maybe it was something that was being used more. But with the advent of how information is shared and the access of how things are permitted, meaning we don't always we have way more windows into basically everything now with social media and how we communicate versus 15 years ago when in 2008, which was the first SFMA course publicly. But for me, I am okay if somebody were to say I had a silver spoon in my mouth where I walked out of PT school into the NBA, and then being in minor leagues. In the NBA, I was the assistant athletic trainer for a fellow named Ted Arzonico with the New Jersey Nets. But because I was always in the weight room when things were not I wasn't needed, just to lift myself, I met Rich Galatry, who is a name that is in the same clique of some people like Rob Panarello and Al Miller, and Johnny Parker, all that New York group. Obviously, Al Vermeil would be in that group as well, but people don't seem to talk about him very, very much. So I got a very, very early dose of understanding concepts of strength conditioning, and then in the minor leagues, if you're the head athletic trainer, it doesn't really matter if you're a physical therapist or not. But you're also the strength coach, you're the equipment manager, you're the travel coordinator, you're the team mother. So again, I always knew how to lift weights. I probably hadn't hit my stride as a competitive power lifter at that point, but I always knew how to lift weights, and I probably looked like I knew how to handle weights, and that's actually how I think I got the head strength coach at 76ers, because again, I was there as the assistant athletic trainer, and we didn't have a strength coach, so that would have been 2003. So the players would, hey, Chuck Wagon, come here, put me through one. And I knew how to lift weights, but I didn't really have a keen thoughts other than what I learned from Galatry about athletic development. And so to me, it was kind of always this thing that it just made sense to me, because also as a power lifter, you kind of realize that you never really feel good, but you might not be injured, and you're certainly not injured enough to not train or even compete. It just clicked to me that additionally, like if your foot hurt, well, a squat is a lower body exercise. It's your leg exercise, not really. Not too many people think about like your foot. It's not there's no isotonics at the foot. A lot of those things really just clicked to me. And no, I guess you wouldn't see it, but I mean, it really depends in all the different places that I'm privileged to look into. And I got to make sure I talk slowly here so I don't say anything I shouldn't say, but it's still not at the levels that people would think it is, a very common thought process. It's not in elite sport. It's I think there's probably a lot of people that say that they're not in silos, but they are, because it's just a fashionable thing to say, and there's no exposure of what they're doing for other people to decide or not, if they can learn from that. But I've been flattered, not only obviously by your guys shooting off my resume, but some people that are probably a lot older than all of us, and people that have seemingly accomplished a lot of things. They would say things like, "You changed the profession." I'm reticent to accept that accolade. So obviously it has had an impact, but I've also gotten to a point too. I'm not really worried about what other people do. I just explain what I do. But it's hard to say. Um, it's just very, sometimes I'm sure we have enough time, but it's not it's not an elevator pitch anymore. It's not like there's so much that goes on in my head that try, because it's not even about what we do as professionals. It's more about people working together. It's more about earning 30% of a whole lot is way better than 100% of a little. It's about, there's no way any one individual can do everything. It's about like what a person deserves. And then there's obviously a significant amount of science and neurology and physiology that no whatever a great individual does can always be amplified by what someone else does. So yeah, it's hard to say really if are other people doing that. I'll just say I don't know too many people that really think with the peripheral vision that I think with.
Yeah, and in my limited experience of working with professional organizations, I saw a lot of the same things where it was shocked when you looked under the rug and saw that it wasn't being done. And as much as they said on the surface level that this seems to rationally make sense, that they're not actually executing. And so, like, obviously there's ego involved. There's people threatened of their jobs. Like, where do you see the biggest pushback in 2022? Other than the fear of being exposed, like what's the pushback to not integrating and getting out of our silos?
In pro sport, I think it's because those jobs are so glorified, whether it's the glory and being recognized of working at that level, or in many cases what you get paid. Folks just don't care. Their standard for their workplace is just different than what I'm suggesting. That doesn't make them a bad person. It just means they have lower standards. Meaning, you'll hear things, "Oh, we're getting better." I'm like, okay, that means you suck. But they were like, people get judged by like saying, "Oh, they're a really nice guy," or no, we get along and we have meetings. Yeah, that just means you have meetings. Like, I'm not talking about like not hating somebody, even though that's obviously at some levels, but that's just a poorly executed business model. In the real world, I think there's still obviously a very significant thought process that the doctor or the medical the highest level is not the highest level. That's the doctor is in charge, which is ridiculous. To think that like after a surgeon does surgery, like their value has now dropped from 100%, like the most important component of the team while the surgery is happening, to one of the least important. To also think that any one individual knows enough about what everybody else does, but then the public or the individuals in the situation may have a perception of hierarchy, that somehow a physical therapist knows that how, what, if, when for certain exercises, when that's just ludicrous. Like, why don't I? It's so I don't even know how to communicate that, because I'm sure we've all dealt with people in all sides, because it can go the other way too. And I'm sure I'm at fault for that, along with others. But that where you have non-medical professionals that are judging and questioning, and then doing a lot, because even though my courses and the things that I've taught have never crossed any boundaries that I'd be uncomfortable with, there are plenty of seminars you can take to become a bad physical therapist in 2 days. So whether it's the glory or the money, which are always going to be stratified across different spaces, it's whether people do understand it, but then they just keep it to themselves. They miss the part that you can't be good at everything. But it's very easy to misinterpret things. I do feel significant onus that I somehow gave people permission to do things, and it goes a lot of different directions. It's not just medical people getting into training, but it's also training getting into medical. The whole idea of T=R was like from a scientific approach and specific adaptation to impose demand and division of labor. So people don't care. They just want to do what they want to do, and that's okay. That doesn't make them a bad person. We're just talking, and we're in a barbershop right now. I think what I run into is when I say that.
I wish it was.
But you know what I mean. It's like sometimes, like, in our profession, that's why I'm caveating what I'm saying, because we're talking about people we don't even know, but yeah, like he's an asshole because he says X, Y, Z. Like, dude, I have an opinion. I was asked a question. I gave an opinion. Since when do opinions matter? Well, because it's me, maybe. I talk louder than others, so my opinion matters more now. It's it's weird that, but I don't think people are bad people. They just do what they want to do, and that's what works for them. And if they can, uh, there's dudes that last 30, 40 years in pro sport doing some really odd things. So it's how it goes.
So, Charlie, question for you. So, hypothetical question, and maybe it isn't a hypothetical question. Maybe this has happened, but let's say you have the opportunity. You're working with a pro team. You could build the medical team and the strength and conditioning team. What would that look like to you?
There is no medical team and strength conditioning team, and it's not hypothetical. We did this in Canada basketball. We had one staff. Obviously, that staff was comprised of individuals that actually there's six. This is now there can be overlap: medical, fitness, sleep, nutrition, psychology, and load management. So that doesn't mean you need six people, but you probably can't have two. So and then when you apply a system of we have, and this is, I have these presentations, and because I do get opportunities, and I do feel like sometimes I don't get to follow through on the opportunity because there's a significant realization of what is needed and what needs to be resourced to execute this plan. In Canada basketball, we did that where when the system calls upon the individual, we're just people that know how to do things. And if you have a system that understands those six, and maybe you like seven, or maybe it's four, or you want to call them different things, that's totally cool. But there is no medical staff. If there's an injury, then someone who has those skills moves forward and addresses it. But at the same time, all six, and this comes from a little bit of experience from when I had to visualize things working in Marine Corps. Imagine if all six of your weapons were always targeted at the same thing. So we would always choose tests that every individual can impact. For instance, here, you guys name a physical quality that can be anything. Just name it. It doesn't matter what it is.
Strength.
Okay, so medical people, even if there's no pain, can apply techniques that can be leveraged to improve strength. So neurological techniques that sometimes get people out of pain, but can also make you stronger in a very, very temporary phase. Obviously, fitness has something to do with that. You cannot exhibit strength if you do not have proper nutrition. Clearly, if you don't sleep well, your strength will not be maximized. Everyone can be affected positively by psychology. And if you played 4 games in 5 nights, you're probably not going to be able to demonstrate strength. So we would take that approach. So then, Mike, to answer to the next part of your question, if somebody doesn't believe that, then that's not how we build out the team.
Love it.
That's awesome stuff. And so Charlie, one of the things I've always found in the elegance of your work and seeing the evolution over the years is how many different disciplines that you'll take from and utilize, and whether it's ranging from HRV to aerobic conditioning to strength methods and so forth. So we talk about in our course, it's a principles bias course. And we don't really care at the end of the day what you do, whether it's kettlebell training or kinesio taping, but have some principles and some questions that you can answer. So when you go and see the next thing, whatever that is, and usually that next thing was probably something that was here 50 to 100 years ago, right? What's kind of your vetting process to say this has value to add to my system in terms of and then the fact that you keep saying system, I love, and then what makes you kind of make the decision that that's the tool we're going to reach for today?
So most of the time, anything can fit in this model, provided it actually legitimately creates an adaptation. I think there's a lot of things that create a change, and I'm curious your guys' opinion. If I rub your shoulder and it moves more, that's not an adaptation, but it did move more. We don't expect that to last very long. I'm hesitant to call that an adjustment because then it gets confused with a chiropractic technique. But basically, as long as it legitimately creates an adjustment or an adaptation, it can fit somewhere in the system. More specifically, because I had to do this in Canada basketball, because unlike other elite sport, we're judged by people that understand neurology and physiology. It's not a GM. It's not somebody who's a former player who really just judges if you're a nice person. We found that the common targets of all of our tests would be acidosis and hypoxia. So, Eric, your question is, how do you vet something? Well, what would it do to minimize or help neutralize acute or chronic acidosis, and how would it fit into hypoxic or glycolytic environments? So again, if it does something, it might be very, very far from that, or it might be very, very similar. So that's and then those things that would be targeting all live in another 4 categories. If you notice, like, I keep moving my hands because this is a slide that on the bottom has the 6 and on the side has the tests, is movement, output, readiness, and sensory systems. So when we talk about this in other situations, you pick whatever movement examination you want, do it. I don't even talk about the ones that we use in Canada because if somebody had a predisposed opinion on a commercial model that we would use, well, then you lost them. Then they're not going to listen to you anymore. So you just pick anything that looks at movement, output, readiness, and sensory systems. Movement, very simply, can joints get in the right position to absorb adaptive stress. Output is who you are on your best day. Readiness is who you are today. And sensory systems is a little bit more unique, focusing on the eyes, because anytime we see something, that begins the process in order to react to it. So does it fit anywhere into those big global terms? Almost anything can. The issue would be then, does it actually fit in its spirit, in its science? Yes, but does it actually create an adaptation? And then do you recognize that it has to live with everything else? So many people have really, really good techniques, and they just want it to solve everything. So then they'll use an evaluation model that I flippantly say comes in the Cracker Jack box. If the evaluation comes inside the Cracker Jack box, it's only going to take you to Cracker Jacks. So you can't use that evaluation, because I need all my team members to feel good enough that whatever they like doing has a role. But if I use an evaluation that lives with a commercial model and has exercises or manual therapy attached to it, you're only going to do that manual therapy or that exercise, and that's a dangerous thing. That means you're saying that your model does everything. Well, that's obviously foolish. You can't. Not, it's impossible to achieve everything in movement, output, readiness, and sensory systems. So that's part of the vetting process. It's not even a vetting process. It's just a positioning. It's like, where, okay, tell me what you think it does. I'll decide what it does in utility, and tell me how to do it. That's it. I don't need anything else. You just tell me, give me your stuff, and then I'll place it into this. And it might, unfortunately, if it's different than the person that's teaching it or selling it, they get mad. They get real mad about that. But that's okay. I paid full price for their information, and I'll use it how I see fit.
So I'm going to pick up kind of with the evaluation piece, and something that Mike and I have found kind of really eye-opening when we started teaching our stuff is we would ask the people in the crowd, and these are pretty well accomplished athletic trainers, personal trainers, physical therapists, and say, okay, what are your non-negotiables? Meaning, like, what do you really need to know about a individual before you can proceed forward? Like, what are those things? And most people kind of put their chin in their chest and didn't have an answer for that. It wasn't like, if you're going to walk into my facility, like you just gave us, you're going to have something that looks at these 4 buckets. And if I don't have that information, I don't know if I can give you a program. So shifting gears out of kind of the more professional realm into like what we see at the public sector, like, where do we change that mindset of, and what's kind of your approach to the trainer out in the field, the physical therapist in the field, to say, establishing a set of non-negotiables that I need this information, or else I'm just guessing, I'm just throwing shit against the wall.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it finishes with, but it's a big start. Is, can joints get into the right positions to absorb adaptive stress? Because everything that we're doing eventually speaks to a movement with a particular set of parameters. So even maybe before, can joints get in those positions for the movement that you're talking about? What movement? Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we training for? Or what is the goals of the individual? That's non-negotiable. You have to tell me what you want. Like, this is we're in the direct customer service model. Like, you have to deliver what somebody is asking for. If they're like, oh, how can I help you? Oh, I'm not sure. Okay. All right, I'll wait over here. You let me know when you know what you want. Because at the very, very basic level, in the general population, you don't need movement, output, readiness, and sensory systems. You don't, but in a system, you need everything, and then you strip it back. You're still running the system. But if you want them to move, how do they move? And now you can take whatever evaluation model for, can joints get in the right positions. You then bucket every joint in the body into different categories to then choose exercises that either exploit the joints that move well enough for fitness, or do they need more special exercises because you think they do need to do those things. For instance, hips do not need to flex to any particular level to be a human being. However, if you want to run or squat, they need to flex to a certain point. Well, if the person doesn't want to squat or run, then they were going to walk. Well, you're a little bit handcuffed, but you can have them walk up hills and up treadmills. You can put a weight vest on them. You can put heavy hands on them and carry things. And maybe their hip doesn't need to do that. Now, there's probably a long-term consequence to that. And now you've just built out like an ROI, like a business model for how you're going to help this person. So if there is a specific goal that the individual wants to do, well, then you need to know where they're at so you can best parse other models into this, where if you don't know anything about their fitness, their cardiovascular conditioning, well, then how do you know where to start? Well, at least if you choose exercises that do not lend to the assumption of a medical problem, meaning you're only going to do movements that don't hurt, you can now, I think you can guess a little bit, and you'll just be behind. At least you're not going to harm the individual, meaning you start at the beginning, meaning you don't put them into a maximal cardiovascular effort right away. You start really, really slow, really, really basic. And then if they defeat that and they're not challenged, then you move on. But how do I know which exercises to use? That's where the non-negotiable is in terms of using a model that tells you, can joints get in the right positions to absorb adaptive stress? They can be painful, they can be stiff, they can have a unique motor presentation where the joint doesn't perform variably. And I'm obviously using fancy words just to say pain, mobility, stability, and fitness. So now, what exercises do you have that where the joint is going to respond reliably to some form of load, whether it's force velocity, work capacity, strength, speed, all this different qualities? At least you're not going to hurt the person if you train them with a technical approach. Because that's what my thing is, you're allowed to decide. Like if somebody can't reach past here, I'm sure if you put something heavy in their hand and they just do a half press, something good is going to happen, right? Like something valuable will happen. Yeah, down the road, you probably you should expect to have an accelerated degenerative process, but you still might have a big arm, like that. I think we missed that. Like we put our system that we developed in 10 years in Canada basketball obviously has decision makers. So we would not do such a thing without managing the shoulder. But there are good things that can happen with other interpretations of joint function.
So here's a question, and we throw this out, and nobody necessarily has the right answer, but that if you have that person who comes in and says, all I care about is having a big arm, all I care about is looking good in a t-shirt, what level of personal responsibility do we have to make sure that they can scratch their head in 20 years, right? And that in doing that diligence to say that may be a non-negotiable, that look, on my watch, we're going to do this, we're going to do it to where we're not sacrificing anything, or even to the extent that we owe them some level of baseline physical competency. The expression is if you work out all the time with me and you still can't help me move a couch, your program probably sucks, right?
No, that's a powerful question, Eric, because it's one of morals and ethics. It's not about science and physiology and neurology anymore. I think the non-negotiable there is you have to explain it to them. That's number one. Meaning, okay, if we do this, I know how to do it, and we can achieve what you want. However, my opinion is very strong that you're going to be paying with other things other than your hard work and our business exchange. I could see also starting with somebody to do all that and then being like, look, man, this isn't working. And that's always available and a very, very difficult thing to do. As our most moral and ethical dilemmas.
Absolutely. So you brought up cardiovascular and aerobic conditioning, and I know it's not only become more in vogue as of late, but I know that you've concentrated a lot of your recent work and done some great stuff with that. And Talk to me about not only the impact that has on fitness and performance, but how that enters the rehabilitation world and how it all ties together.
Well, let's. There's probably a lot of directions to go with this, and but when we talk about the word aerobic, I think the first word that should come to mind is oxygen. So aerobic training is actually a terminology I don't use because I think it can mean a lot of things, and we should also know that no matter what the intensity is of an exercise, the aerobic pathways, the requirement of oxygen is always involved. It's not a. It's not like you're still using different. You're still using some level of aerobic qualities when creatine rebinds to phosphate. Which is one maximal rep. You still need oxygen to do two. So, but obviously, as I mentioned, everything in my bias funnels towards hypoxia and acidosis. Excuse me, and the reason would be that for any given biomotor, the big fancy word, for any given physical task, um, the longer you can remain using energy systems that predominantly use oxygen, you will stave off the accumulation of acidosis, which has a whole bunch of other fancy words to describe that's very, very important. That's why there's some people that, maybe me being one of them, puts extremely high value, whether it's for health or for fitness. So the uh, maybe somebody would suggest that whatever somebody would suggest is the hardest um, glycolytic type activity, like grappling and MMA, construction workers, movers, a lot of these physical tasks. The limiting factor is not how strong or how explosive they are, because they do it for such a long period of time. The aerobic system is the limiting factor to lasting 10 rounds in a boxing fight. That's, for someone that does, that's really weird. Please just don't reject it, because it's 100% fact. It's non-negotiable. But then how that relates to rehab is two ways. One, if tissue is healing, so the body is already broken, then having a better opportunity to utilize oxygen, in theory, will make something heal faster. Additionally, engaging in aerobic activity, utilizing oxygen while you are injured, has other impacts on other systems of the body that directly affect healing. The big one is in the middle, because if you are constantly training and not relying on oxygen as much as other people, so your body has to pay a higher price for those energy systems. So I hope you're lifting really, really heavy weight and jumping really, really high and throwing ropes as hard as you can. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not. They're doing basic medium level work, but paying a very, very high price for that. And one of the prices that you pay is muscles will start to contract without your voluntary control. It's not necessarily a spasm, but it could be. But the word that most people will suggest is that it increases tone, and this goes back to what Yanda tried to teach us in the '60s when none of us were alive yet. But it's actually quite true that under certain conditions, certain muscles become more apt to have this resting tone. Now, I don't use the word tone because it can be confused with other things that are very, very positive. All of us would slump into be an ooze if we didn't have any tone. So I try not to use words that gives anybody a chance to come at me. So the actual terminology that's used in the literature, instead of tone the way we're describing here as a byproduct of acidosis, is spontaneous electrical activity. That means muscles are contracting spontaneously. Uh, this is this is very easy to confirm in the literature, where, for instance, if you do an EMG of somebody's trap and the EMG reads X, and then you put a needle in it and then take it out, like therapeutic dry needling, and then take the needle out and re-EMG the trap, the EMG is diminished. So you decreased spontaneous electrical activity. And clearly there are muscles that are more apt, because those are the ones that would typically be very, very useful for you when engaging physical activities, like your traps and your pecs and all the muscles that you would use to fight or run. So now, if you're constantly dealing with spontaneous electrical activity, muscles are contracting. That is a metabolic process that you must pay for. And if it is already being precipitated by acidotic or high threshold environments, you're now increasing acidosis and tumbling that process. So now, all of a sudden, now somebody grabs your shoulder, and it's like it's this incredibly uncomfortable sensation, because now those contractile elements, muscles, have now undergone different levels of hypoxia. So acidosis comes first, hypoxia comes second. Why is that important for rehab? Increased partial pressure of oxygen stimulates the brain to lay down something called alpha pro 1 collagen, which is very easy to call scar tissue. Scar tissue is not your problem. Oh, yeah, we're breaking up scar tissue. That's complete foolishness. If you're breaking up tissue because it's being aligned in a spontaneous fashion, that's the difference. So if like you keep your friends close, your enemies closer, hypoxia while you're moving through mobility training, meaning you use the pneumomuscular reflex and create high levels of tension in a direction that you want it to go, now you can realign collagen tubules in the direction of your movement. That's very, very good. But if it's spontaneous and you don't even know it's happening, this is how tissue injuries can be contributed to by having very, very poor aerobic fitness. You get into the spontaneous electrical activity environments much quicker. You don't even know it's happening. And then all of a sudden a muscle tears because the alignment of the collagen is not consistent with your activity. So it's obviously, a life-sustaining thing. It's obviously got, well, I think it's obvious, a contribution to healing after something has already broken. But the big thing is that middle ground, and maybe that's an example of train equals rehab. The equals is this appreciation that if you are terribly unfit, you will increase the turnover of collagen in a spontaneous fashion. That's bad. That's really, really bad. I don't know many people that talk about that in the sphere and scope of minimizing muscle injuries. That's a big thing. So just be fit. Be fit. I'd rather you be fit than move like a gymnast, because I don't have to have you move like a gymnast. I need you to be fit. That's where the aerobic piece, I think, fits in all the different categories.
Mike, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that is a theme that I've noticed by reading your work early on. So this is like earlier when I wasn't actually working with FMS, I would read a lot of your work on FMS, and the way that you were able to break things down. I was actually able to learn more about the FMS stuff by reading your post on rotary stability, because you have this way of explaining it in a simple fashion, which means you truly understand it. Number one, but it seems like you have this, like sort of this systematic approach for when you're, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like when you dive into a topic, you dive into a topic. Like, it seems like you don't, like that you don't
Yes.
stop until you know every damn thing about it. And no, it's beautiful because I kind of think in a similar fashion, but I've noticed these trends that, and you go on a topic and you don't go surface level. It's almost like, I don't want to use the word obsession, but you just go and go until it seems like you know every damn thing about it. Is that how you're wound? Or is it, or is that
I mean, I think so, but I don't know. I don't really think of how I'm wound. I'll go back to the FMS piece because I do think that should be interesting for the people listening. But when it comes, this is something I found, Mike, where because I guess at some level you flip a coin, and I'm reading something that is written by somebody that is medical or non-medical. Okay, so even if it's nutrition or other things, that So there's a perspective there. And I'm a firm believer that solutions for very, very big problems are easy to other people, meaning that it might be like the most impossible thing to me. And then if you ask somebody who doesn't think like you and also doesn't care about what you care about, they're like, oh yeah, just go left. They're like, oh my God, that's so right. But they don't work with people. They might sit in a bank and count and type all day. So I have an opportunity, and some of the most important things, such as part of the cascade of hypoxia and acidosis, I learned from people that didn't want me to know it, not because they had a secret. There's enough of that in continuing education where people keep secrets. But ultimately, I learned I was able to put things together from people that didn't know everything, but they're, oh my God, like, wait a minute, say that again. Hold on, holy shit, like, and then that made sense to something that had nothing to do with it. For instance, um, in fascial manipulation, which is an Italian model of manual therapy that blends Eastern and Western models, they have points. They have areas that you're supposed to do cross friction to. And the gentleman that invented it or founded it, whatever the proper term is, his name is Luigi Stecco. And his children are also part of this model, and they're both MDs, but they don't research the efficacy of the model. Okay, because that's important to know. Oh, it's the guy's kids. Of course, he's going to research it in his favor. They don't. They're not. Their research doesn't say whether this model works or not to solve someone's pain. What they research is what is unique about these points. So if you say it works, and obviously something happened that's very, very desirable, let's look at these points. And they found basically that any point that was a major money move had local area of acidosis. So, like, okay, well, that's really interesting. Maybe if we trained to minimize acidosis, these points wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have needed this powerful manual therapy to change. Now, there's very little exercise in their model. You treat once a week. It's because it's got a Rolfing kind of tinge to it. Now, I think that's a mistake. I don't think any tissue will remain the way it is without active exercise. So that there's an example. Like they had they were just telling me what they thought. But now I take that to be like, okay, because if you follow models of Eastern Bloc training, anti-glycolytic models are very well used and researched. Like, oh, so if I train that way, I won't need this super powerful rehab tool because those points have acidosis. So if I stay as far away from acidosis as possible, so obviously, if I'm wound a certain way, it's to continue to search and like find these things. But I didn't know what I was looking for. That's what's kind of cool. So I think I don't know if that's the right answer, but I think that's what I think. But when it comes to the FMS, even though I don't nearly teach the formal courses as much as you guys, remember I'm writing it from my perspective, and my perspective it's actually way before there was any courses in like 2003 and 2004. These things were like normal, like these were how it was explained, and when you have dinner with somebody, it's how it explains. Whereas sometimes when you have a business and a commercial model, it has to be reproducible. It has to be like so. When I haven't done one in a long time, but if I do teach a level one, I have to, and it is the right way to do it for that. We all teach it the exact same way because it represents a model. But if I'm going to explain it on my own, well, then I can explain it any way I want because it doesn't need to be reproducible and I don't need to represent someone else's approach. So I'm glad that my FMS writings help you understand it because it probably should. But there's a reason that everybody has their own way of doing it. But then there's one way to do it that is the way of the commercial model.
Well, I think you helped a lot of people understand that. Probably had a bigger impact than you probably ever thought, because for me, it helped me understand how to, utilize the system better. So
cool. Yeah, that's good. But I get that a lot. Like, well, how come how come they didn't explain it like that in the course? I'm like, because I'm teaching it how I feel like teaching it. If I taught you the formal course, and and look, I want to make sure that this isn't condescending, but at some point you need to learn the kindergarten way, then you need to learn the high school way, and then you need to learn the PhD way.
100%.
And then depending when any one individual got exposed to that particular model, before 2000 whatever, there was no courses, there was no certification. You had a bunch of grainy VHS tapes. You had stick figures. You had a Reebok core board. You had no choice but to integrate it and interpret it your own way, because there wasn't a brand that kept it in this reproducible fashion. And even within the era of functional movement systems being obviously a significantly viable brand, it's changed, over time, and it's probably been made less complex as the years gone on. Certain categories that may have been one or two became one. So it's very, very important to keep up and take courses over again, or at least, and I think that's why like once you're certified, you have access to whatever's on the website. And then all of a sudden, every once in a while, you'll get a website. Hey, we have an all new, level 2 model, and if you're level 2 certified, you get access to it. You get to learn new ways and new things and maybe new standards. And I think it's okay. Like anybody can say whatever they want, but I'm not certifying people in FMS doing it my way. If I teach it, I will teach it. I'm happy to teach it in the way it's supposed to be done.
I think the one thing about just your work in general, your body of work, is you take complicated stuff and you make it easily more easy to digest. And that was the one thing that I noticed. I was just like, I get it now, and I think we need more of that in the industry.
Yeah, that's I don't look at it sometimes, and I just say what I say and do what I do. And there was a point that I never even wanted to be online, and there's a lot of times I don't really want to be online because
Yeah.
it's but because I never thought that I would be able to be consistent with providing something that somebody would want. I'm very glad that, and I can't. Unfortunately, I cannot relinquish it because it allows a lifestyle and a stroke of my ego that's very favorable.
So as we all kind of evolved, professionally and personally, not only do we change the lens in which we see things, but there are certain things that change in terms of the information that we know now versus 20 years ago. Is there anything that stands out in your mind that, hey, I've really changed my stance or thought process on, and not necessarily a particular brand, but in terms of a category or or an element that you might have had a blind spot to, or you might have been really into, and now you really may not see the value to? Is there anything in particular that stands out that, like, if you looked at a Charlie session 10, 15 years ago, that you would said, I wouldn't do that way anymore?
Yeah, there's got to be a ton of things. Obviously, the what does Boyle call it? The something about the orthopedic value or
Orthopedic cost of training.
Orthopedic cost.
Yeah.
Which is funny because we have something called structural costs that I was talking about, I was talking about that 2 years ago when we started putting together this course. Yeah. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, it's Mike Boyle is never wrong. I don't disagree with anything he says. I may have other other models that complement and make the message a little bit more global, less linear. But I don't disagree with anything he says. And so this whole idea, I think, is a lot of people know. I didn't suck as a competitive powerlifter, and there was a point that squat and deadlift particularly was just an enormous part of what I did. Now, at that time, I was seeing people a lot more regularly, meaning there was a very short period of time, about 2.5 years, where I actually worked in the real world. So I had like a 9 to 5. So I would see people 2, 3, sometimes 3 times a week. So we had opportunities to get really, really heavy over time, especially people that had lower body surgeries. Right now, I think that I think she's ranked number 4 in her weight class. Her name is Kate Cohen, and I think I started working with her when she was 12. And there was a point that she was deadlifting, 2 wheels sumo, probably 2 months, ACL. I would not do that today. Not because it's like there was nothing scientifically bad about it. It's just dumb. It was just stupid, especially it's
I
like
like that. We're gonna have to. That's the perfect line.
It's whatever Boyle is saying. Like the risk reward is just dumb, and I have to believe that I was suffering from my own emotional biases because that was something that I enjoyed doing, and I knew it. And look, an ACL compromised knee, and obviously after surgery it's not compromised anymore, but it's at its most stable in the closed chain. So I'm like, what's wrong with this? Her form looks good. It's not like she's leaning one way or the other. Blah blah blah. So there's a lot of exercises that I would not use with people that I used to use quite a bit. That's just one little story. But at the same time, I can remember about 4 or 5 young ladies, and I would put them in some of the most proudest situations that I've been into as a professional, because they either had ACL or some kind of lower body injury that are very, very common in young girls at that age. And they all were monsters. And they all still looked, very, very feminine, and the way their parents would communicate, because these girls got a chance to learn, what it was like to be in a weight room. And then, if they started at 4 and then the boys came at 4:30, they were literally stronger in the big lifts than the boys. And for them to be able to gain all of the things that we think young women should be exposed to. So maybe I would not have achieved that if I didn't have them squatting and pulling 2 wheels, at God, whatever 105 pounds or whatever these little girls were. But I remember, I forget her name, but and I can say Kate Cohen's name because I was at her wedding. But she was a field hockey player, and I think she was still in high school, and then she was going to Brown. Um, and she could do rear foot elevated split squats with 55 pounds in each hand. Okay, this is not like a Division I shot putter. I mean, this is a tiny little girl that had to run around for field hockey, and it was just the coolest thing to see back then. Additionally, I think I probably would have thought train slow, be slow. That's absurd. As we talked about in aerobic, it's not. Train. Think about like a marathon runner that they're still running like for 2.5, 3 hours. They're running like 10 500s. Like they're not. It's not slow. So to do long distance, as long as it's maintained at a particular pace, is obligatory for most people. So train slow, be slow. And then maybe something that maybe people would find interesting, um, the value or the obligatory nature of, I don't call them corrective exercises, but that's what many people would call them, special exercises for movement. I don't think they're as necessary as I once did. Like, oh my God, like your FMS is a 1-2, we have to do this, this, and this. When in fact, it's just a risk reward. And if that individual can touch their toes and look good deadlifting, I wrestle with that. I'm sure you guys have an opinion as well. Do you have to go backwards? Because if they look good in what they're doing and everything is measuring out, particularly from a readiness level, meaning you're paying the correct price for what your training is doing, do I really need to go back and correct something that maybe really isn't wrong? So a big thing, corrective exercise is not a term that I use, but I would have championed it a lot more several years ago. We still use them, but I call them special exercises for movement, but not nearly as much as we used to.
Yeah, we just call it good training now, Charlie. We dumped that as well. We had a whole episode we did on why we hate corrective exercise in terms of how it's perceived now.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you, and I'm going to steal this from another podcast I heard you on, and it goes back to our kind of personal and professional development. Is you have the system use where you kind of go with 3 different books, And for the people who didn't get to hear that, I'd love to have you share that in terms of how you kind of choose your reading materials, because I've kind of stolen that
Oh,
myself. You know what I'm talking
I'm
about?
like, oh shit! Like, what books is he talking about? Um, so at any given moment, and I don't know what it is, whether my eyes are not good at converging or diverging or whatever. It's very hard for me to read like for a long time. So I'll change the books that I'm reading. Like if I'm going to read on a plane, I can't sit there and read for 3 hours. So I then put that down and then pick up something else to read. So there's always at least three that are in rotation. There's one for me, there's one for you, and there's one so we can escape us both. So the one for me is something that would typically fit into self help, maybe more recently, not necessarily self help, but rather learning about something new, like mechanics, which I'm not into, but that it would be something that's very unprofessional, something not related to what I do professionally. The one for you is something about training or rehab or nutrition, because if I know it, then I can serve you. And then to escape us both is a comic book. So it's actually really interesting as to how um, artistic people that write and write movies. It's like, oh my god, this is such real life. Like this is even though it's drawn like a cartoon and people have power rings and can fly. The things the problems that they're dealing with and the solutions that they're trying to find has significant parallels to the real world.
Do you have any currently in your bag that you would recommend?
So what do I have right now? Let me see. So um, I'm actually reading it twice because it took me so long. But a friend of mine who I met presenting in China, his name is Inigo Mujica. He doesn't think I can speak Spanish, but I can. He's from the Basque country in Spain, so they have a very debonair dialect of Spain, and I just talk like a Puerto Rican. So, but he has a book. What's it called? Like it's called like endurance training, but it's like a picture book and it has like those little white men that have very circle heads, pictographs or infographics, and it's got chapters. It just basically goes over the entire training model, but it's so easy to read because it's all within infographics. So that's the book that I'm reading for you. Um, I'm trying to catch. I'm reading Flashpoint again because if DC ever comes out with the next Flash movie, it'll be based on Flashpoint. So I kind of want to feel that I'm up to date on that. And then the self help book. I don't have one right now, but I can go back inside and go take something out of the garage and put it into play.
Awesome. So, with that, let's go off topic because there's some commonalities I know we share. There's some we don't. I've never been the big wrestling guy you are. Love Disney, but not anywhere near to the level you are.
uh,
Favorite Disney ride right now.
Favorite rock? Yeah, Expedition Everest.
Okay, yeah, my family and I did that 9 times in one day. I think that's on the top of our list as well.
I think I have four, maybe five different Expedition Everest T-shirts.
And I know growing up in the same era, you have a favorite late '80s, early '90s hip hop artist. You got to pull out one old cassette CD. Which one's it going to be for a workout?
Digital Underground.
Okay, well, Humpty
Okay,
Hump. Kudos.
that's it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're setting me up for this, but like a lot of people know I can, and I believe he's passed away, but I can do the voice. If I do it, people are like, oh my god! Like there's a couple. Like I don't say I do voices. It's just me trying to sound like somebody. But I can do the Humpty Hump voice. So is that what? Are you baiting me into doing that?
No, okay.
This is pure. This is voluntary. If you wanna grace us with your singing voice, sure. But if not, we can go to the next question.
I have this huge smile on my face. I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but let me say like check it out. I'm gonna flip and trip and let it all hang out. Like, so I don't know.
Yes!
I don't know.
That's spectacular.
That's it.
I don't know
That's
if
worth
that
the
comes
price of
across.
admission, folks.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know if
the
that
worth
comes
the price of
across.
admission right there.
No,
All right.
actually, I like doing that stuff because what I don't like is when people judge me, especially when they don't meet me at all, and that's why I'm very open with Disney and wrestling and other stuff because I don't like it's harder for people to talk shit about somebody that likes Disney, but whatever.
Well, as I like to say, I love to take what I do very seriously, but not take ourselves too seriously. And unfortunately, a lot of us in the business get that in reverse. And I'm glad you got it right, Charlie. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate your time and your insight. And this has been awesome. So thank you.
Cool. All right, man.
Thank you, guys. Once again, this has been episode number 7, along with Dr. Charlie Weingroff, talking about where training equals rehab. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, everybody.